What is the fastest way to run PHP? Is it FrankenPHP, Swoole, RoadRunner, Workerman, or is the good old php-fpm still good enough? Every month I publish the PHP Annotated newsletter, and I like to include a couple of experimental projects in every edition. A few months ago, I stumbled upon a project called ngx-php, which claims to be the fastest way to run PHP today, at least according to the popular web benchmarks at techempower.com. For a long time, the fastest PHP setup here was Workerman, followed by Swoole and then the rest. But now, ngx-php seems to outperform all of them. Interesting, right? Well, I was skeptical. First of all, PHP embedded in Nginx? Is that Apache's mode PHP striking back? And secondly, anyone can show good numbers with a Hello World application, but can you actually run a production app? So I set up a challenge for myself. Can I run a Laravel example application on this? And how does it compare to other ways of running Laravel? Let's create a Laravel example application. I actually don't remember how to do that, so I will ask JetBrains AI and run the command it gives me. Now I can test this with artisan serve using my local PHP. Hopefully no one uses this in production. Cool. So now I want to run ngx-php. I'm impatient as hell, so let's first see if I can actually make it work. Then we'll go back to proper benchmarking and comparison. Let's see how TechEmpower runs their benchmarks. They use Docker, and we can reuse their approach. I'll clone their repository and copy a few Docker files and Nginx configuration. Let's create a Docker compose file to run all the services. I'm too lazy to search for an example, so I'll just ask AI to generate a simple stub for me, and I will build on top of that. I'll rename the service and adjust the path and port. I run the Docker container. In the Nginx config file, they have a location that runs simple PHP echo statement, so I will open the page in my browser, and luckily it works. Now, I want to run a PHP file with it. We need a content by PHP block directive, and then we can include a PHP file there. So I will just include a new PHP file and echo PHP version. Awesome, it works. Let's run Laravel. For that, I need to change the file path to Laravel's index.php. I will actually create a new location for this. And if I open the location in browser, I see the Laravel page. Great, so we're actually running Laravel with ngx-php. Yes! And let's do a quick benchmark. I'm gonna use the WRK tool for that. It gives me 96 requests per second, but it actually can do better. The way to achieve that is to run a worker with ngx-php. What's the difference between a worker and just a classic PHP file? A worker is always loaded in memory. Let me show you. I'm creating a class with a static counter in a worker file, and then in the request handler file, I'm going to print out this counter and increase it by 1. Now, if we go to the browser and hit this request many times, we will see that the counter is growing, which means that the class is always loaded in memory. There is no database or anything like that involved. And that is exactly how Laravel Octane works. Octane boots your application once, keeps it in memory, and then feeds it requests. There are pros and cons to this approach, but I won't dive into that today. I install Laravel Octane. As a PHP runtime, Laravel Octane supports Swoole, FrankenPHP, and RoadRunner. So I'm going to implement ngx support real quick. And Octane has 3 main components: worker, client, and request. I will create custom client and request, and I'll use the default worker. For the request, I'm going to extend Laravel's default HTTP request class. I made in a static constructor function, which will just populate the request object with data from ngx-php. Now that we have a proper request, Laravel Octane can handle it for us. I'm adjusting the worker path, and we need to create a location in ngx config that will call the onRequest function in the worker file. Perfect, it works. And we got 265 requests per second with ngx-php in worker mode. But how good is that? Let's compare it to other ways of running PHP. First, we compare it to artisan surf. I will run it on a different port so we can get back if needed. And let's run the benchmark. It's 16 requests per second. Alright, but this is unfair. I mean, no one uses artisan surf in production, I hope. So let's compare it to php-fpm, which is what most of the PHP applications are using. I create a new Docker file with php-fpm and I add ngx as a web server. I'll use the recommended ngx configuration from the Laravel documentation, but I'll adjust it a little bit. It works, we can see the page in browser, and now we can run benchmark. After running it a couple of times, it's 72 requests per second on average. Now let's use something faster with Laravel Octane in worker mode. Let's start with Swoole, another Docker file, and I'll use the official Swoole images. It works, but how does it perform under the benchmark? This is a pretty good result. Let's try FrankenPHP. I'll use PHP CLI image in Docker, and Octane will handle the installation of the FrankenPHP binary. Okay, 211. Last but not least, RoadRunner. We'll add a new RoadRunner service in Docker Compose and run RoadRunner with Laravel Octane on a new port.
Whoa.
The result is quite impressive. It's even faster than ngx-php.
That thing right there is unbelievably good.
But let's try actually running ngx-php once again. I think there's something more we can do there. I see some requests timing out. Let's check the logs. The workers hit the memory limit and die. It could be a sign of memory leak, but who cares? Let's increase the limit and make it infinite. Now let's rerun it and we see a bit more requests per second. That's great. This will be our final results. ngx-php is indeed the fastest way of running PHP. That's it for today. My conclusion. ngx-php is fast, but debugging and fixing issues would probably be a nightmare. I cannot recommend it for production apps. Swoole, RoadRunner, and FrankenPHP are fast and production ready. But here's the main thing. If you need to run a small to mid-sized PHP application, you don't need anything in worker mode. Just use php-fpm on a managed or shared hosting. It's cheap, it's fast, it's secure, and applications are easy to develop, deploy, and maintain. And there's
one more thing.
Never trust benchmarks you didn't run yourself. My name is Roman Pronsky. I work at the PHP Foundation, a non-profit organization that develops the PHP language. Hope you liked the video and see you next time.